Welcome to the next part of Questions of Life. We're looking at the question, does God really exist? So you're saying that as human race, we are created differently to every other created species. And God says that we were created in his image, which is why we are that different, because we reflect something of the goodness of God. In that passage, it talks about God creating them, so male and female, in his image / her image. What does that say about God, and what do we as human beings reflect of God's character and what he's like? I mean, I know you've talked a bit about that sense of injustice, the compassion, but just unpack that a little bit more.
I think the masculine and feminine aspects of humanity are all coming from God. So all of those things that he... I always find it helpful to refer to God as he. I just find that, just maybe it's the way I've been brought up, I find that helpful. It's the way it's often talked about. He's usually talked about in the Bible. But that the he-ness of God is different from the... Is that a word? He-ness of me.
Well, you have that, yeah.
The masculinity. God is masculine and feminine. He is all of what humanity is. Gentle, compassionate, merciful, gracious, faithful, joyful, creative. All of these things come from God. And that he deliberately makes humanity diverse. And that not one of us fully represents the image of God. But that it is in community, it is in relationships with other people that we best show who God is. That all of us bring an aspect of God's character and nature, and combined we're more likely to see the fullness of God. So God is in the diversity of humanity, and all the different parts of us come from him. He's the source of all of that.
So we're putting together evidence that points towards the existence of God. So just recap for us the 3 points that you have made.
So there's the idea that we have a concept of God.
Yep.
There's the idea that we exist and the remarkableness of that. There's the idea of the complexity of us and our design. And there's the idea of the feelings and attributes that we have that are different to animals. And all of those might be used as probabilities. They can't prove it beyond doubt, but they make it more likely to me. It is more rational to me that God exists than that all that I am is accidental.
So we believe there's a God out there. We believe that there's evidence pointing towards his existence. I remember the pop star formerly known as Prince, I don't know what he's known as now. He once said that God is a funky little dude. Everyone's looking for him, but no one can find him. So we believe in the existence of God. We believe that there is the evidence that based on the series of probabilities, it's highly likely there is a God, and we've kind of invited him to journey through life with us. Where can we see God in our world today? Because I think for many people, they look at what's going on. So you look at the coronavirus, you look at starvation, you look at lots of just difficult things that are going on, and we're talking about this God existing. People are like, well, where is he? Mm. How can I see God? How can I find him? How can I experience him? Because at the moment, all we seem to be seeing is stress and anxiety.
I mean, I think it's a really good question to ask, where do we see God? I think that from a rational point of view, I would start by saying that if there was a God, I would expect him at some point to demonstrate his love by coming to earth and revealing himself. And I would expect, if God did exist, that he would come at the earliest point where there was the communication and the resources to record that to most people alive at the time. Surprise to surprise, at the height of the Roman Empire, the transition between the Greek and Roman Empire, where literacy was at its height, stronger than it was ever going to be for the next 1,000 years, there's a guy who claims to be God, and we can explore that in future weeks. So I think one of the first things is, if there's a God, where is he communicating and where has he been? So there's an historical part to it. I think asking where God is now, I think that for lots of people, I suspect, watching this now, you're watching this because there is some sense of God drawing you. some sense of hunger, some sense of searching. And I think that is part of what God does, is he draws us in. There's a great and deepening sense of spirituality, that people are wanting spiritual answers. They are wanting to know this sort of inbuilt natural thing that is there. I think lots of people are trying to work out what that means. I think that we see God the existence of Christians is a two-edged sword. We talked about how both of us were put off by church.
Yep.
It is certainly true that most people reject God because of the behavior of Christians. That is undoubtedly true. And that's we know enough about what Christians can do to know how distressing and frustrating that can be.
Yep.
But equally, some of the most beautiful things that happen in our world happen through people of faith. Mm-hmm. You only have to look at our nation and where the food banks come from and where the vast majority of them are. You go to any crisis in the world, you go to any war-torn place, you go to any place where there is famine and suffering, and you find out who on the ground is risking their lives to get involved, and there will be more people of faith than not. Mm. And so Christianity, you see God very often in his people getting involved and making a difference. Mm-hmm. I hope that you see God right now in the care and compassion of people who know him, who are trying to reach out and trying to support and trying to look out for others in God's name. Our nation is built on a number of very significant Christian people over the recent centuries who have made significant impact because they felt God was influencing them and changing them. So I think we see God in people. And I think we see God in this sense of us trying to find answers in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. I've had a text message in.
So we're alive, people are hearing us.
People can see us, which is
great.
Fantastic.
That's a relief.
Well, it may not be a relief for them seeing us. I've had a message in. So do text and email us in if you have more questions. Just wanting you to go into a little bit more detail about what God is like. So talked about Genesis and he, she of God. Just a little bit more detail. He's got that old guy that sits on a cloud with a beard and sandals, with people surrounding him playing harps. Just flesh out a little bit more what God is like.
That's one of the easiest questions you're going to ask me, because Jesus is the full image of God. He is God on earth. So any understanding of God that is in contradiction of who Jesus is wrong. And so sometimes people do build a perception of God on the Old Testament, and Jesus corrects that. He comes and shapes that. So who is God? He is generous. He is merciful. He is patient. He is compassionate. He is faithful. He is long-suffering. He is involved in our lives. He is wanting to restore, to redeem, to repair, to put right, to fix. Future weeks if we look more at Jesus. But everything that Jesus is exactly who God is. There is nothing that you can say, oh, well, Jesus was this, but God wasn't. That doesn't work. Everything about God is seen in Jesus. And the more you read the gospel, and we talked about that last time, didn't we? The more you look at how he treats the people who've made mistakes in their life, how he treats the people who hate him, how he treats the people who are broken and vulnerable, and what he declares about himself. He's here to bind up the brokenhearted, to bring good news to the poor, to set free the captives. All of that, that's who God is. And I get passionate about that because it's just so fantastic. Yep. When you see, when you discover how Jesus treats people is how God is. And in particular, when you look, if you just want to look at the story of Jesus on the cross, that is God. Gentle, forgiving, self-sacrificing, powerful, conquering death. That is God. Drawing alongside, involved. And it makes sense to me that if there was a God who created in me a care and concern for other people, that he would at some point appear to be compassionate. Human beings can't have a sense of compassion and justice if God isn't compassionate and just. So I would expect him to have appeared, and in Jesus we see that.
I think for a lot of people, they have a different understanding of God. So all that you've said about God is fantastic, and I agree with. But I remember when I was growing up and when I first became a Christian, that wasn't my perception of what God is like. And I think for a lot of people, there is this idea that God is a judge, that he's looking down from heaven and he's totting up all the bad things that we've done, that he's looking for us to make mistakes. He's like a really strict school teacher that's going to discipline us, that is a real authoritarian. And I always found that really unhelpful. And so when I first became a Christian, and this idea of relating to God in those kind of ways that you've described, it took me a while to begin to get my head around it and to allow him to be those things, because I would always come to God to pray or to read the Bible feeling guilty. I always felt that I wasn't good enough, and I felt that anyway in life, and I think that I probably transferred that onto God. So sometimes the way that we're treated by our parents or other situations actually has a way that changes the way that we see ourselves, but it also can affect the way that we see God. And so my view of God was completely skewed. And so it took me a long time to begin to trust that who God said he was actually who he said he was. And so what I decided I would try and do was to spend some time in the Bible. And I would read different of the promises that God made about himself. One of the books in the Old Testament, the book of Psalms, I love it, written predominantly by a guy called David. David had some highs and some lows in his life. He was a little shepherd boy that defeated Goliath. He went on to become king. But his life was in danger. He faced many, many struggles, and he did many things wrong. And the Psalms are him just crying out with honesty to God. And in there, he talks about a lot of the characteristics of God, a lot of the promises of God, and just his struggles with that. And I found that really encouraging, that there was someone that we would class as a good Christian, a man of faith, somebody that God used to do great and wonderful things. I was really encouraged that he didn't have all the answers. I was really encouraged that he was struggling with what he thought of himself. He was struggling with what he thought of God. And there were times when he got it and he was like, yes, God, I believe you to be like this. And then there were other times when he was like, where are you? What are you doing? Have you deserted me? Are you there? Have I done something wrong? And I love that. And I suppose what I'm saying is that very often we come at Christianity, we come at faith, we come at God with a whole load of baggage. I mean, we carry so much baggage around in our lives anyway. We carry around stuff that we regret. We feel guilty. Other people have hurt us. We've been defined by so many different things in our lives. And we kind of bring all that junk to us when we begin to explore Christianity. And it takes a little bit of time, doesn't it, to begin to sift out, okay, well, this is what actually I thought, but maybe isn't true. And for me, it's about going back to the basics. And it's going back to, what does the Bible tell me that God is like? And then I'm going to trust that. And then I'm going to try and believe that, okay, what I thought of God wasn't actually what he is like. But also I'm going to ask him to help me with that. So that's kind of like a journey that I've been on. So for years, I would predominantly just pray to Jesus, because I got Jesus, because Jesus made complete sense to me and wasn't like anyone else in my life. But the whole God and who is God and beginning to trust him, I think it's a little bit harder. I think we can come at it with baggage. What other advice would you give to somebody if they've got this kind of like in their head, oh, I'm scared of God, or I feel guilty, I don't feel good enough, he's judging me. What would you say into that situation?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think that our perception of God is a child is born with a pure perception of God, and it's then shaped by the significant adults in their life, often the significant male adults in their life, and that can be unhelpful. And it can be shaped by their experience of religion. It can be shaped by their experience of school and school religion. It can be shaped by their experience of church. One of the reasons I get frustrated and one of the reasons why I feel passionate about church leadership is that we cannot present God as somebody who is a use of control. And it's undoubtedly the church was used God to control people, and the state used God to control people. So a lot of that baggage is in a lot of people. Starts around 4 or 5 years old, and by the time we're teenagers, there's a lot of baggage there. So I think you're absolutely right. Just keep going back to Jesus and allow something external to shape our view of God rather than something internal, something objective that has stood the test of time. We talked a lot about Scripture last time. It's so precious. And if the Bible was untrue, it would have been forgotten by now. But so allow that. And I think begin to recognize that where our perception of God differs from how Jesus is, to say, okay, well, where's that perception come from? Who told me that? Who enacted that in my life? Okay, that wasn't truth. It might have been sincerely done, it might have been accidental, but it isn't truth. And allow the truth of who Jesus is to shape us. So a lot of that's about prayer. And I think sometimes too that can be encountered in worship, in hearing the music and the people of God worshiping. There is a sense in which that can transform how we've perceived God before. I keep going. One of the things I think is helpful is that you, if you want to measure whether something's straight, you need something external. You need a ruler. I can draw lots of lines, but I don't know whether it's straight. We were questioning last week as to whether we got the cross straight. I hope it's straight. Now, at the end of the day, you need a plumb line. You need a spirit level. Our own thoughts are subjective. They're influenced by people. They're influenced by our experiences. They're influenced by what has happened to us. We need something external that stands the test of time. The nature and character of Jesus is the best thing. And remember that Jesus was so shocking to the first people who met him because it was different to the Old Testament understanding of God, that they wouldn't have written it that way if it hadn't been the truth. They wouldn't have described him in those ways if that wasn't how he was, because they considered it blasphemous, the things he said and did. And so one of the things that, again, we've talked about the nature of God, but a lot of the atheist assumptions are based on the Old Testament. It's very difficult to base atheism on Jesus. And so to look at Jesus, remembering that this is unlikely to have been made up. We know there was a guy called Jesus. We'll look at this in future times. We know that he existed, and we know that he was radical and that he changed people and that he never went anywhere near violence, and yet people followed him. I could go on about Jesus.